Savannah couldn't move. She lay on the floor of her own home in a pool of blood. Weakened, beaten, unable to even lift a finger, she stared at the ceiling, thinking only that in a few more minutes it would all be over. But what about her little son, Daniel? Who would take care of him after her death? How would he remember the mother with whom he had spent only a few short years? Worrying thoughts chased each other in her mind. She tried to fight, to stay strong for Daniel, but her injuries were too severe. Her killer still loomed over her, weapon in hand. His cold gaze pierced through her to the bone and promised nothing good. Suddenly, his expression changed. He jerked sharply and ran upstairs to the second floor of her house. "Daniel's room is up there!" all flashed through Savannah's mind, just as a sharp gunshot rang out. The thought that something might have happened to her son was so unbearable that Savannah's mind mercifully plunged her into unconsciousness. Savannah Fuchs was born in the city of Roy, Utah. She grew up in a loving family and was the only girl among 4 siblings. As a child, she had many friends, and she maintained those friendships over the years. Already as a teenager, Savannah realized she was deeply interested in hairstyles, fashion, and makeup. She often met young women who impressed her with their beauty and well-groomed appearance. Stylishly dressed with gorgeous hairstyles, Savannah wanted to look just like them. She soon learned that these women worked as stylists, makeup artists, and hairdressers. At the age of 19, Savannah decided to follow in their footsteps and enrolled at the Paul Mitchell School of Beauty. 2 years later, after receiving her diploma, Savannah got a job at a salon. It was during this time that she met her future husband. Soon, the young couple was expecting a child. Savannah and her husband were happy. A wonderful little boy named Daniel came into their lives. However, not long after the baby was born, the couple decided to divorce. They still loved and respected each other, but their marriage had run into financial difficulties. After the divorce, they remained friends. Now Savannah had to provide for 2 people, herself and her child. She worked tirelessly, and her job as a hairdresser meant she was on her feet all day. Moreover, she spent much less time with her son than she would have liked, but there was no other choice. In October 2012, Savannah received a call from a friend who had opened a hairdressing school. She offered Savannah a job at her school. Savannah loved the idea and immediately agreed. However, the new workplace was located in North Ogden, Utah, which was more than 50 kilometers, over 30 miles, from her home. Of course, it was very inconvenient for Savannah to spend so much time commuting and picking up her son after daycare. So she started looking at rental listings for a place closer to her new job. One day, during a routine drive through North Ogden, Savannah noticed a house with a for rent sign. She immediately called the number listed. The owner of the house explained that if Savannah decided to rent, she would be living in a townhouse. Right next door, in an identical townhouse, lived another tenant, a very pleasant elderly man who had been renting there for 7 years. The owner also mentioned that the previous tenant, a young single mother, had suddenly moved out without any notice or explanation. It seemed strange, but Savannah felt like this was her lucky chance, and she agreed to rent the place. Soon, Savannah met her new neighbor. The man was in his 50s, and his name was Todd Allen Barber. He seemed very friendly to Savannah. He treated her warmly, and little Daniel quickly became like a grandson to him. Overall, Savannah felt that Todd was lonely and craved companionship. She appreciated his attention as he reminded her of her own father, who had passed away a few years earlier. Fortunately, Savannah also made other friends in North Ogden, including Dennis Long, the principal of the school Daniel started attending. She also quickly discovered that most of the people in her new neighborhood were Mormons, while she and her son were not. Savannah was Jewish. 6 months passed. Savannah was enjoying her new job and her new life. But one morning, as she was getting ready to leave for work, she discovered that one of her car's tires was flat. She didn't want to be late and was trying to figure out what to do. Of course, she could have called her mother, but her mom lived 20 minutes away, and it was still early morning. Savannah didn't want to bother her. At that moment, her neighbor approached her. He had noticed she was having trouble with her car. The man asked where her father was, suggesting he might be able to help. It was a strange question, and Savannah had to explain that her father had passed away and that she was used to relying only on herself. Todd offered to give her a ride. Savannah gratefully agreed. On the way, Todd told her about his daughter and his grandchildren. Savannah kept thanking him and eventually worked up the courage to ask if he would be willing to pick her up after work too. Todd didn't mind, and that evening he drove her home. After the time Todd helped Savannah, he started stopping by her place more often. He helped with small chores around the house. Savannah liked feeling his support. It reminded her of her father. Wanting to repay Todd for his kindness, Savannah offered him a free haircut. After she finished with his hair, she decided to ask him about the church services. But Todd's reaction was not what she expected. He slowly turned to her and stared intently. He wasn't smiling, nor was he angry. He looked at her with a dead, emotionless gaze that sent chills down her spine. It was an eerie feeling. Savannah didn't like it. Still, she quickly pushed the incident out of her mind. A few days later, everyone was celebrating Catholic Easter, and Savannah found a card left at her door. The card was from Todd. He had written, "Thank you for becoming my friend. God bless you. Best friends forever." Savannah felt a little uneasy about the message. Of course, they had been friendly neighbors, but best friends forever sounded extremely out of place. Not knowing what to think, she called the landlord and told her about the card. The woman laughed and explained to Savannah that she was a lovely girl and Todd was simply giving her a compliment. There was nothing to worry about. Todd had been living in the neighboring townhouse for 7 years, and he was her best tenant. There had never been any problems with him. About 2 weeks later, it was around 11 o'clock at night. Savannah and her son were already asleep in their rooms when there was a persistent knock at the door. She didn't want to open it, not knowing who it was. She decided to wait for the visitor to leave, but the knocking continued and continued. Savannah went up to the door and, without opening it, asked who was there. It was Todd. He said he had a package for her. Savannah replied that she would take it in the morning, but he kept knocking. In the middle of the night, it was extremely frightening. She and her son were alone in the house, so she called the police. The police escorted Todd onto the porch, and Savannah overheard him saying that he just wanted to help as a neighbor, not ask Savannah out on a date. That was truly a strange thing to say. Still, it wasn't enough to be considered a crime. The officers simply said goodbye and left, and Savannah had no idea what to do next. She had never had neighbors like that before. Soon, Savannah had some free time that she could finally dedicate to her son. She was sitting on the porch reading a magazine. Todd appeared with a baseball glove. He offered to teach Daniel how to play baseball. Savannah didn't like this and took the boy inside, explaining that they wouldn't be playing with Todd anymore. Her son cried as he had gotten used to Todd and wanted to play with the ball, but his mother stood her ground. After her refusal, Todd posted on social media, "I was sitting on the porch. The neighbor boy Daniel, whom I sometimes played baseball with, came up to me. He said, 'I can't play with you anymore. She doesn't like you.' She heard and yelled at him. I hate adults, they're so fake. I want to spend the rest of my life playing with kids. They're awesome." Savannah saw how Todd was trying to win her son's affection, but she believed that his actions were inappropriate. From that moment on, if she and her son wanted to play outside, they had to wait until their neighbor wasn't around. Literally 8 months after moving in, Savannah approached her car and saw that the tire was flat again. Before she moved into this townhouse, her tires had never gone flat so often. She was sure that it was her neighbor's doing. Savannah was afraid that she would be late for work again, but she would never ask Todd to give her a ride. She called Dennis, the principal of the school where Daniel was attending. A few weeks after her move, they had become friends, and he was happy to help. Dennis checked the tire, and there was no foreign object sticking out of the tire, but it was indeed flat. A few months after the incident with the tire, Todd no longer bothered Savannah. They didn't argue and simply didn't communicate. But one evening, far from perfect, after a long workday, when she picked up Daniel from school and they came home, Savannah saw that someone had taken her son's pink chalk and written in large letters on the door, "Pray for forgiveness." Without a doubt, she believed it was her neighbor's doing. So she sent him a message asking if he had written it or not. Of course, he didn't admit to anything. Savannah was tired of these games. She wanted to make Todd fear her. She called the police again. In her presence, he laughed and repeated to the officers that he hadn't done it. He was just an ordinary good neighbor. Savannah felt completely helpless. From then on, she simply didn't want to go back to her house. She would drive around the town just to return as late as possible. But even that didn't stop Todd from causing trouble for her. Most of the time, her car was targeted. In addition to the flat tires, Savannah once found a scratch on the body of her car. It was 4 centimeters long and shaped like a diamond. She contacted the police again. A young inspector came. They talked, and he said they wouldn't be able to prove anything. She thanked him for his help and went to work. In the fall, she was supposed to renew her work contract, but she told herself she wouldn't stay in Northern Ogden. Savannah was planning to inform the landlord that she would be looking for a new place. She was uncomfortable living next to Todd. It was impossible to hide from him. He was always watching her from his window and was surely eavesdropping on all her conversations with family and friends through the shared wall. Fortunately, the holidays were approaching, and she and Daniel took the opportunity to relax and distract themselves by visiting Baltimore. They went to museums, walked around, and admired the city. She was able to truly unwind. But soon it was time to return. Savannah and Daniel arrived late at night. Savannah opened the door and, leaving the keys in the lock, started bringing things in from the car. But when she brought in the suitcase, the keys were no longer in the door. The entire key ring, including keys for the car, the house, the mailbox, and the office, was gone. She searched for them, thinking maybe they had fallen while she was carrying things, but couldn't find them. The girl reported the lost keys to the landlord, and within a week she had completely forgotten about the loss. Moreover, she was still planning to move. She asked Dennis for help in finding a place to live. Before Thanksgiving, Dennis took her and Daniel to look at a couple of houses in South Ogden. The prices for the homes were acceptable, but the deposit turned out to be very high. As a single mother, she simply didn't have that kind of money, so she couldn't move. Dennis encouraged her and drove her home. But the unpleasant surprises didn't end there. Thanksgiving was approaching when everyone buys a turkey for the holiday table, and Todd left a turkey on her porch. This wasn't the first of his gifts. At first, when Savannah didn't see any threat in Todd and thought he was just looking for friends, she gladly accepted his help and small presents. Over the summer, Todd left them a gift every month. She didn't keep this a secret, and her colleagues often asked her what Todd had left for her on the porch this time. But when their relationship soured, Savannah didn't want to accept any more help or gifts from Todd. Savannah lost her temper. This man wasn't leaving her alone, and he wasn't even trying to be just a friend. She took the turkey and threw it in the trash. Her family and friends began to worry about Savannah. They didn't hide it. They saw that Todd was acting not like just a lonely person who wanted companionship, but was he really dangerous? At that moment, no one could have imagined that. Despite the fact that Todd couldn't help but notice Savannah's reluctance to accept his gifts, he continued giving them. For Christmas, he piled her doorstep with toys and other things. Of course, Daniel wanted to play with the new toys, but his mother insisted that he not touch anything. Savannah threw away all the toys so that Daniel wouldn't see them. Suddenly, she remembered when she had come to look at the house, and the owner had told her that the woman who had lived there before suddenly ran away. After all, she too was a single mother. Could it be that she had gone through the same thing? A month passed. Todd didn't bother Savannah every day, and each time she almost believed that maybe he had understood and decided to leave her and her son in peace. But one evening, after work, she arrived home and found a ladder standing against the left wall of the house, right by the bedroom window. At first, she thought the landlord was doing unexpected repairs without warning her, but she realized it was Todd who had done this when she saw a Christian fish symbol carved into the window by the bedroom, reminding her of the same symbol someone had scratched on her car. Savannah assumed that the neighbor was targeting her because of their different religions. She called the landlord, but she was told she should contact the police. The police responded that the issue with the ladder had to be resolved by the landlord. Savannah called the landlord again and admitted that she was tired and wanted to move out. The woman promised that Todd would be evicted in the spring. Todd continued leaving gifts for Daniel on the doorstep, which Savannah threw in the trash. She could no longer tolerate this. On the police's advice, she decided to consider a restraining order. But a restraining order could be obtained against an ex-husband, the father of her child, or a lover, but not a neighbor. Besides, Savannah thought it wouldn't help because Todd lived just on the other side of the wall from her. Unexpectedly, there was a lull again. Throughout February and March, Savannah didn't see Todd. A year and a half passed since Savannah and Daniel moved into the townhouse in northern Ogden. The girl experienced both good and bad in this house. But finally, April 1st, 2014 came, the day by which Todd had to leave his home. The landlord had promised to evict him in the spring, and that day had arrived. Savannah's alarm clock rang at 5:30 a.m., as usual. But what was unusual was the noise in the hallway. She didn't immediately realize it was Todd. The man entered her bedroom and turned on the light. He was armed. Moreover, he had brought bags, duct tape, and ties. Savannah realized the man had come to assault her and kill her son. She knew that her son was sleeping in the next room and thought only about how to protect him. The girl tried to talk to the man, to ask what he was doing in her house. He ordered her to shut up and struck her hard in the left temple. Like a wild animal, she fought with him. He continued to hit her, shouting that she had ruined his life and now she would die. She decided she would not give up and would fight no matter what. She managed to break free and run to the front door. Savannah opened the door just as he caught up with her. Screaming didn't make much sense because she lived in the last house. away from the others. Savannah grabbed the doorframe, trying with all her strength to break free from his grip, but despite his age, the man was stronger. He dragged her back into the house and slammed the door shut. The loud sound woke Daniel. The boy started calling for his mom. She shouted, "Daniel, run to your room! Todd has broken into our house. Run to your room!" Todd pointed a gun at her face, looked at his victim with a frightening gaze, and pulled the trigger. But the shot didn't go off. The gun jammed. Then Todd pointed the pistol at the floor, and it fired. That is, if not for the misfire, Savannah would have been dead. But she no longer had the strength to continue fighting. She was weakened, injured, and thought only about her son, what would happen to him after her death. Knowing that she was living her last minutes on earth, she simply looked at the ceiling and prayed for God to save her. Suddenly, Todd dropped the gun from his hands. He fell to the floor next to Savannah. It seemed as though the man had come to his senses and began apologizing. He grabbed the phone and called emergency services, requesting an ambulance and the police. He told the operator that his girlfriend was wounded and that he himself was the cause. After waiting for the police to arrive, Todd picked up the gun from the floor and ran up the stairs. A shot was heard. Savannah felt very weak, lost consciousness several times, but wanted to believe that her son was okay. When she regained consciousness, she saw her son's face above her. He simply said, "Hi, Mom." Officers escorted the boy to a police car and confirmed that he was okay. While in the hospital, a police officer came to visit her. He asked if Savannah had any idea how Todd might have gotten into her house. Only then did she remember the lost set of keys. When Savannah recovered, she decided to file a lawsuit against the Northern Ogden police for doing nothing to protect her. According to her, the terrifying signs of impending danger were evident, but the police continued to reassure her that she had nothing to worry about. Officers assured her that Todd had never had any run-ins with the police, but her lawyer found out that in 1990 in Georgia, he had been convicted of carrying a firearm during a crime. The police should have done their job more carefully, discovered this, and at the very least warned Savannah about the potential danger. On the city side, the mayor found it outrageous that the woman and her lawyer thought it possible to demand an enormous compensation from the residents of Northern Ogden for a terrible crime committed by a malicious man. He stated that she had been offered various courses of action before the 54-year-old Todd Allen Barber broke into her house and attempted to kill her, but she had refused to take the advice. Specifically, she could have obtained a restraining order. Therefore, the mayor stated that the city would not attempt to settle the compensation issue until after the trial. The court agreed with the mayor and the police, denying Savannah's lawsuit claim. Savannah was incredibly lucky to survive that early April morning. After the beatings, she needed 50 stitches. She felt terrible, nauseous, and was plagued by headaches. She couldn't stand for more than a minute. The girl was afraid to be alone, and when she was discharged from the hospital, she lived at her mother's house. After recovering, she moved not far from her. But however long and difficult the road to recovery was, she managed to heal both emotionally and physically. In 2016, her book was released, in which she told her incredible survival story.
Christmas 2017 didn't start off well for the Aguilar family from Elche, Spain. The family owns a bakery, so the holidays are the busiest time for their business. Spouses Rosa and Alberto Aguilar decided not to keep all the earnings at home and took them to the bank. But when Rosa approached the cupboard where the family kept the money, only small change fell out of the pouch. 6,000 or 7,000 euros were missing. The spouses were afraid they had been robbed, but the door lock was intact, and there were no signs of a break-in in the house either. Then they decided that perhaps their daughter Patricia knows more. Patricia Aguilar is the eldest child of Alberto and Rosa. 2 weeks ago, she turned 18. Patricia was a typical teenager, albeit a bit introverted and shy. She studied art and spent a lot of time in her room on the computer. Her parents were worried that she had few friends and was becoming reclusive. Therefore, Rosa was very happy when her daughter said she had been invited to a birthday party. The girl left with an overnight bag and has not returned since. Her parents wrote and called her, but she did not answer. They didn't know what to think. Considering that the money went missing at the same time as Patricia, Alberto decided to contact the police, but the police were confident she would return soon and didn't rush to find the 18-year-old girl. By evening, the issue of money no longer concerned the parents. They wrote to Patricia that they wouldn't scold her as long as she returned home. That night, they couldn't close their eyes. When they finally received the message, "Everything is fine, I will contact you in a few hours," from their daughter Alberto and Rosa didn't buy it. The message was not written in the way their daughter would have done it. Now the parents were convinced that something had happened. The most likely scenario seemed to them that the thief who stole the money had kidnapped the girl and taken her phone. Rosa couldn't sit and wait, knowing that the police were not taking any action, so she went into her daughter's room and searched through all her belongings. Every book, notebook, pillow, stuffed toy. She even looked under the lamp and behind the paintings. She realized she had found what she was looking for, although it was not at all what she expected. There were some esoteric symbols, descriptions of rituals written by Patricia's hand, and also clear instructions for a trip and marriage registration in Peru with descriptions of the necessary documents. Shocked, Rosa asked her husband if their daughter had run away to Peru to get married there. With whom? The police assured them that the girl had not crossed the country's borders. The plot thickened. Among her daughter's belongings, Rosa found photos of adult women she didn't know. Then for the first time, the thought crept into her mind that a cult might be behind all this, which she hurried to share with the police. But they dismissed her again, because 2 weeks ago, the girl turned legal age and could do whatever she wanted. Weeks passed without any news, and Rosa and Alberto decided to turn to the public. They understood that the internet would be of invaluable help to them in this, but the Aguilar spouses were not familiar with it. They didn't even use social networks. Therefore, they turned to Noelia, Rosa's cousin. Patricia treated her as an older sister. Noelia responded in kind, and when her help was needed without hesitation, Noelia closed her shop in Benidorm and came to Elche. It was not difficult for her to find out that Patricia had been communicating a lot with some guy who sent her lists of books on black magic and esoterica. One word appeared particularly often in her notes: gnosis. As Noelia read, the concept of Gnosticism involves the search for knowledge, truth. But in the 1950s, several groups emerged claiming that allegedly to be saved in the apocalypse, one needed to cleanse oneself of sins. This could be done by engaging in intimate relationships as often as possible. Becoming carriers of such truth, the new followers of the doctrine had to renounce their families because other people were doomed, they were enemies. After finding all this out, Patricia's relatives realized that they didn't really know the girl and that she had been living a double life for a long time. A few more days passed, and Patricia got in touch. She wrote to Noelia that she was fine, but she wouldn't return, and attached a photo showing her holding a piece of paper with the date. She explained that she and her boyfriend were traveling in a mobile home across Europe, and they were currently in Pitești. But Pitești is in Romania, and the police assured them that the girl had not left Spanish territory. A quick search online told Noelia that on that day in Pitești, the temperature had dropped to -6 degrees Celsius, and the girl was wearing just a t-shirt. Noelia tried to call her back and found out that the girl's phone operator only serves South American countries. If, according to the police, Patricia had not left Spain, how did her phone do that? When Noelia tried to confront Patricia with this new information, she became agitated and rudely demanded to be left alone. But Noelia wasn't going to give up. In fact, the police were mistaken. On the very first day of her disappearance, when Patricia supposedly went to her friend's birthday party, she flew to Lima, Peru. After 2 years of online communication, she finally met her beloved, Steven. He met her at the airport and immediately took her to a hotel. There, he became Patricia's first man. Thanks to the money she brought with her, they were able to rent a small apartment where Patricia met 29-year-old Mariori Garcia Valverde and 42-year-old Paula Vega, the other, as he called them, wives of the man. Patricia knew she would become Steven's third wife, but he didn't warn her that they would live with 4 children, Paula's daughter and 2 girls and a boy from Mariori. So 8 people ended up living in a small apartment, and there was no space for intimacy, which they were supposed to engage in every day. Steven and Patricia met 2 years ago. It was a very difficult time for the teenage girl. Patricia had an uncle, her mother's brother, Jose. He loved his niece very much, spoiled her, spent time with her when her parents were busy. For Patricia, he was both an older brother and a father figure. However, in 2015, 29-year-old Jose fell ill. He was diagnosed with pancreatitis. People recover from this illness, but complications arose in Jose's case. He passed away within 4 months. The whole family was devastated. While Alberto was able to fully immerse himself in work, His wife Rosa and Patricia couldn't cope with the pain of loss. Rosa developed depression and found solace in simple computer games that allowed her to distract herself. Unfortunately, during this time, she distanced herself from her children and husband, and Patricia, who needed the support of her loved ones more than ever, became very vulnerable. She began to ponder what happens after death, as she could not accept that death was the end. She became interested in this topic, visited relevant websites, and she met Stephen, a man with very developed communicative and manipulative abilities. He studied psychology books to know how to penetrate the consciousness of every person. He called himself a savior, a messenger facing the impending end of the world, apocalypse. He made naive girls believe that they were a couple in a past life, and that his wives, his queens, had a mission to populate the world after the apocalypse. Stephen realized that Patricia was the perfect victim because she was a teenager, and, as is often the case at that age, felt insecure and believed that nobody cared about her. All of this combined with her natural innocence. Stephen took advantage of her psychological vulnerability due to her uncle's death and used his persuasive methods to lure her into his traps. While her family was preoccupied, for 2 years Stephen worked on the girl's mind to isolate her, and no one noticed anything until it was too late. The girl believed she was safe because Stephen was on the other side of the globe. He gradually manipulated her, first asking for pictures in lingerie, then nude. Only after that did they discuss intimate moments, and the girl agreed that he had 2 wives. He explained this by saying that from a biological point of view, a man is created for relationships with many women, but a woman can only have one husband because a woman is a temple. Relationships with a man allow a woman to progress spiritually. A man can do this himself, but for a woman, this is the only way. And now, after 2 years of online communication, Patricia gave up everything and ran away to Stephen. He gave her a new name, Silvana, which means born in the jungle, but she had to get used not only to the new name. She had never taken forbidden substances, and Stephen made her consume a root that caused strong hallucinations. He didn't hesitate to give it to the children either. Meanwhile, the girl's family didn't give up trying to find her. They were lucky that Patricia left plenty of clues behind. Among her notes, Noelia found logins and passwords to computer games and social networks. One attracted her attention because it was repeated several times. Nicoli. It turned out to be the girl's secret page, where she expressed her thoughts about the afterlife. Among her friends, Noelia noticed a young man named Stephen Martinez, and in his friends list there were only girls, 3,000 girls, all roughly Patricia's age. Noelia suspected that he might be behind all this. It was some progress, but for now, Noelia only found the guy's name on the internet. They needed evidence. Then the girl's mother searched Patricia's room again and noticed an interesting document. It turned out to be a medical certificate issued by a hospital in Lima, Peru, in the name of Paula Vega. Rosa realized they had stumbled upon a significant lead, finding Patricia's connection to Peru. The parents turned to the police, who passed the information to Interpol and eventually to the police in Peru. Stephen became nervous when the police called Paula and asked for clarification regarding Patricia. Even before Patricia's escape, he had asked her to forge a medical certificate for Paula. But instead of destroying the copy, she put it in a drawer in her room and completely forgot about it. And now they had problems. If Paula testified, the police would start digging deeper. Stephen decided to get Patricia out of trouble. They went together to the police station. Like a vulture, he watched her every word, controlling her every move. At his direction, the girl told the officers that nobody had kidnapped her and that she wanted to live in Peru. Since Patricia was of legal age, the police saw no crime. They simply let the couple go. This disappointed the girl's family, but at least they learned Stephen's full name, Felix Stephen Manrique Gomez, and they decided to change their approach, to turn to the media. This decision changed everything. The Aguilar family wanted as many people as possible to learn about Stephen's methods, to prevent him from luring other girls into his cult. It was risky because Stephen could either send Patricia home or flee with her. As it turned out, Stephen chose the third option. As soon as he saw his face on the news program, he smashed all the phones and computers and kicked Patricia out of the apartment. He ordered her to contact the embassy to get the opportunity to contact the media and fix everything. Until then, she would be alone on the street, without food or shelter. After a few days, she managed to reach out to a TV program and give an interview live. At first, her parents were relieved to see she was alive. But the things she said broke their hearts. The girl didn't hold back her words, aiming to hurt her parents to the core. She stated that she didn't want to know Rosa and Alberto because they were bad parents. Her father was never home, her mother played computer games for days, and nobody paid attention to her, didn't feed her, or buy her clothes. She considered her uncle Jose as her real father, and essentially her grandmother raised her. Patricia demanded that they remove all information from the internet, all photos, messages about the search, and send her money. Only then would she send them her address. After that, she would decide what to do next. Finally, she told her father, "Do you know why I was so happy in the photos from my birthday? I dreamed of running away since I was 14, and now I finally could leave home." It was painful for the parents to hear this, and many of their acquaintances and even relatives believed the girl's words. After such a shocking statement, both the police and the media lost interest in the case. But her family didn't give up. Noelia decided to make the most of social media opportunities. She created a fake profile similar to Patricia's and requested to be friends with Steven. She tried to portray herself as a teenage girl interested in esoterics, but perhaps she pressed too hard, asking for his phone number to communicate in Messenger. He suspected that she wasn't who she claimed to be, but mistook her for some Karen. He blocked her. But Noelia was already unstoppable. In Steven's friend list, she found one Karen. It was a girl whose photo she had already seen among Patricia's belongings. Contacting her, Noelia learned that Karen had also been in the cult, but she managed to break free from Steven's clutches. However, her sister Mai not only had been with him, but also was his only official wife. Karen confessed that she was afraid for her sister and advised reaching out to her mother Alinda. Perhaps she could help in some way. Despite Patricia partially managing to improve the situation with her interview, Steven turned into a paranoid. He moved the girls and children to San Martin de Pangoa, a region 12 hours away from Lima by bus, in the middle of the jungle. It was a dangerous place with water and electricity shortages, and they could go weeks without bathing, both adults and children. There was also a lack of money for food. The meager coins they had were spent on candles and hallucinogenic roots that Steven used during rituals. Patricia, now called Silva, deleted all her social media accounts, cut her long hair, and dyed it black. It was tough for the fugitives. A man with 3 women and 4 children, one of whom was clearly a foreigner. Cornered, Steven became increasingly aggressive. He began mistreating Patricia very badly. Once he even told Mai, "Maybe we should just kill her?" But it wasn't easier for the others. He severely beat the children and girls, using a leather whip, the effect of which was like being hit by 3 whips simultaneously. He beat the children for any reason, especially Mai's son, the only boy. Patricia got tired of this quickly and told Steven that she would leave him, to which he threatened to take his anger out on the children. Despite the girls being willing to do anything for Steven, even give their lives for him, he soon started asking for things that were beyond even their limits. Living nearby were girls who were rumored to be night butterflies despite their young age. Mai made the mistake of mentioning this to her husband. Steven claimed that the girls would supposedly help him with a new ritual and demanded to arrange a meeting. But Mai couldn't do it because they were underage. She even considered Patricia too young for Steven. The man became so enraged that he grabbed his wife by the neck and began to strangle her. She was almost suffocated and couldn't breathe. He would have killed her if Patricia hadn't intervened. Only then did Steven release his victim. Patricia felt terrible, longing to return home to her parents but afraid of what they would say after all her actions. She lost her zest for life until suddenly everything changed. She realized she was expecting a child. Many advised the Aguilar family to forget about Patricia and stop searching, but her parents decided otherwise. Rosa stayed with her younger son in Elche, while Alberto went to Peru because they couldn't achieve much from Spain. But Peru was a large country, and Alberto was a stranger there, so he sought the support of Alinda, the mother of Karen and Mai. They found a prosecutor willing to help them, and the police began investigating, treating the case as one of human trafficking. The first place the officers visited was Patricia's apartment, from where Steven had already taken her. Alberto could barely hold himself together when neighbors told stories of often hearing screams and blows, and witnessing the girls being forced into intimate relationships in front of the children. Since Steven had taken the children out of school and away with the girls in an unknown direction, detectives decided to track their phones. Steven was horrified at the thought of being found, so the phones were almost always turned off. All they could do was wait for someone in the group to turn on their phone, Meanwhile, investigators found out who this Stephen was. The 35-year-old man was born in Lima into a poor and troubled family. He was bullied by other boys at school, which led him to spend time only with girls. From childhood, he learned how to manipulate them. His father gave him a book that helped Stephen join the Gnostics, but he was expelled because he drew ideas from other cults and called himself a prophet. Gradually, he came to found his own cult. When Stephen and the girls ran out of money, they moved to Alto Selindon, a tiny village with 30 houses. They settled into a hut right in the middle of the jungle. Mostly drug dealers and those avoiding the police, like them, inhabited the area. There was no water, electricity, or food in the hut. At best, they ate only rice and potatoes. Patricia was already 8 months pregnant, but due to severe malnutrition, it seemed like she was only in her 3rd month. The hut was surrounded by huge puddles, and everyone had to constantly wear boots. Fungal infections appeared on everyone's feet, even the children. Their feet were covered in insect bite marks, and their heads had colonies of lice. It was a disgusting place for them and the children, including the unborn ones, because Mai was also pregnant. Mai feared for her children's health. It was very difficult for her in such conditions. Despite her husband's prohibition, she turned on her phone and called her mother, just to hear her voice. The girl didn't even say anything, but it was enough for the police to trace the call. Detectives believed the fugitives were in Lima, but it turned out Stephen had taken them deep into the jungle. The police decided to send 2 officers to the region who knew the case best. They were given 10 days to search. They showed pictures of the group members to everyone passing by, assuming that the girl resembling Patricia would stand out among the other locals. The officers didn't know that she had not only changed her appearance, but also didn't have permission to leave the city. The police decided to go even higher into the mountains. Their persistence paid off. One girl they showed the pictures to recognized Paula. She described her as a strange woman in pink boots who returns home every evening across the bridge with a food package. The officers began to wait at the bridge, and the woman indeed appeared. She moved like a robot, not looking at anyone. The officers followed her. 40 minutes later, they went beyond the city limits and deeper into the forest. Finally, she entered a house where rooms were rented out. The police decided to rent a room in the house because otherwise they couldn't conduct surveillance. They were lucky. They got a room right next to Paula's. They could hear everything happening in the other room. They heard the voices of a man, Paula, and another girl. It turned out to be Mai. But Patricia or the children were not visible. The police did not take more decisive action because Stephen never left the room, not even to use the restroom, and they were not sure if it was him. Naturally, he didn't work. Paula and Mai did while the man lay in bed. And the officers were afraid that he simply wouldn't say where Patricia was. Suddenly, they overheard the man saying that tomorrow they would split up and leave one by one. Stephen planned to go even further to settlements of more wild indigenous tribes. Upon hearing this, the police officers called for backup to capture them. Knowing their schedule, they were able to apprehend group members one by one. Paula was stopped when she left for work early in the morning. Mai also left the house to do laundry. As for Stephen, when the police entered, he was lying on the bed as usual. The man resisted, introduced himself by another name, and pretended not to understand what was happening. To prevent him from stepping barefoot on the floor, pregnant Mai gave him her shoes. After that, he was forcibly removed from the hut. Fortunately, the girls immediately disclosed where Patricia was. By Stephen's command, Patricia and all the children remained in the hut as far away in the jungle as possible when Stephen, Mai, and Paula went to earn money, although Stephen, of course, didn't work. Patricia did everything around the house, took care of the children, and even worked on the plantation near the hut. She was there when the officers arrived. They called her by name. She had become so accustomed to the name Silvana that hearing Patricia felt unfamiliar. The officers believed they were rescuing Patricia and 4 children, but there were already 5. When Stephen, Paula, and Mai left for the city, Patricia begged not to be left alone, but Stephen was adamant, and predictably, at 8.5 months, she began having contractions. She screamed in agony. The children were with her but didn't know how to help her. At the girl's screams, a neighbor came. She was the one who assisted in the delivery. Patricia admits that she never thought she would give birth in the jungle at 19. The girl was extremely thin, looked exhausted when they rescued her, but even then she continued to think only about Stephen and the things he instilled in her. Meanwhile, Stephen was interrogated at the police station. An interesting fact emerged during the investigation. He was left alone with 2 colleagues briefly, and when they returned, one officer had already fallen under his influence. She claimed that Stephen was a prophet and they should help him, not arrest him. Immediately after Patricia, Mai, and Paula were rescued, they were separated as recommended by psychologists. They received assistance as victims of cults, sects, and dependent groups. It took them a long time before they started feeling better. They seemed to be in a lethargic state, but eventually, they woke up. The Aguilar family says that now everything that happened is in the past. They started anew, without accusations, without questions, without doubts. Patricia is still undergoing therapy and lives in her hometown with her parents and daughter. She received education in social rehabilitation and works in an organization that helps people with disabilities. Stephen was sentenced to 20 years in prison for human trafficking, sexual and labor exploitation. Many wondered how Patricia's parents didn't notice the changes in their daughter. Patricia was always a good student, but after her beloved uncle left her life, she started failing. Strangely enough, Stephen motivated her to study better, so they noticed changes in their daughter, and they liked them. They thought she was coming to her senses. At that time, she was dating a boy from school whom her father didn't like. Alberto was happy when she dumped him. She stopped dressing in black, bought bright clothes, smiled more often, and asked to have a party for her 18th birthday. But her parents couldn't have known that all this was Stephen's demands. There were signs to pay attention to, but you never think that someone from another distant country will infiltrate your home through the internet and take away a family member. Dedication, obedience, detachment from the family happens very slowly, insidiously. It's in the cult's interest for their followers not to have loving and caring people around them. Everyone thinks that nothing like this will ever happen to them, but in moments of weakness, anyone can become vulnerable. Patricia Aguilar experienced firsthand what it's like to be isolated by a cult, taken out of her native country and taken away from her family. With her story, she wants to protect others from falling into the subtle mechanisms used by these false prophets. This case could have gone unnoticed by many, but became known thanks to Patricia's parents, who in their struggle to locate their daughter, managed to grab the attention of the media in different countries and share this story. Eliza Levy was young, worked a lot, and loved adventure. She had her whole life ahead of her, but suddenly she was kidnapped by strangers. They took her deep into the forest, tied her to a tree, and threatened to brutally harm her and her family if she didn't obey. Her relatives were beside themselves with worry. An elite group of police agents got involved. But could Eliza do something herself to escape? Using an unusual tool, she put a risky plan into action. Then, one night in the dark, she noticed some lights. Was this the end of the nightmare? Or would it start again with renewed force? The 24-year-old Eliza Levy can be called a child of two worlds. Her father, James Levy, was an American born and raised on Long Island, just a few miles from New York City, while her mother, Alicia Ortiz, worked as a school teacher in Ecuador. They fell in love when James was a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1980s and soon married. Of their 4 children, 2 received dual citizenship in both the U.S. and Ecuador. James believed that raising their children in the U.S. was best, but he unexpectedly found them drawn to the peaceful, slow-paced life of South America. So the couple built a home in the middle of the Ecuadorian jungle, just across the border from Colombia. Together, they founded the organization Altropico to protect the invaluable tropical forest surrounding them. Eliza, the eldest of the 2, adored life in the wilderness. Her adventurous spirit kept her constantly on the move, always ready to search for new bird species or explore uncharted territory. When she returned to Ecuador, she enrolled in university, where she studied botany and biology. It was here that she found a serious passion: cycling. She organized weekly races through the streets of Quito and took long trips across the country. Her other passion became Altropico, the group founded by her father. She volunteered, guiding school children through the jungle, teaching them to identify hundreds of species of local birds. The dense jungles of Ecuador are home to many plants and birds, but they also provide the perfect hideout for criminals. And the country's northern border is notorious for its security problems. Illegal militarized Colombian organizations smuggle contraband and prohibited substances into Ecuador and often use small villages on the Ecuadorian side as refueling stations. In 2009, the most infamous of these organizations was FARC, Colombia's left-wing extremist guerrilla group, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. It was FARC that held politician Ingrid Betancourt hostage in the jungle for 6 years, a story that spread across the world. However, when you grow up in a region, even one as troubled as this, life from the inside often feels completely different. This is why Eliza never felt unsafe in any part of Ecuador. And it was precisely for this reason that she suspected nothing when a man called her, explaining that he was from her hometown and, as an official, wanted to launch a new bird research project in another city near the Colombian border. Eliza agreed to meet him to discuss the details, as long as he sent a driver to pick her up. They settled on that arrangement. On Saturday, October 17, 2009, one of Eliza's brothers dropped her off at the meeting spot with the driver of an Isuzu Trooper. Eliza got into the SUV, but before doing so, she asked her brother to write down the vehicle's license plate number just in case. At first, everything seemed normal. The driver was calm and friendly. But an hour into the drive, he picked up 2 strangers, claiming they needed a ride. In reality, they had other plans. The men pressed the barrel of a gun to Eliza's neck and demanded that she stay quiet. The strangers were driving Eliza to an unknown destination, but her family in Quito had no idea. The last they'd heard was that she was heading to a meeting about tropical birds. When she didn't return to the city as expected and failed to call, they became worried. Even then, they didn't think the worst, assuming instead that a mudslide, a fairly common occurrence in Ecuador, might have delayed her. At the time, Eliza's father, James, was in San Francisco attending an environmental conference. The family didn't want to alarm him, but after 2 days of growing panic, they sent him a message. On Monday, October 19, 2009, 2 days after Eliza's disappearance, her mother, Alicia, received a call from a stranger. He told her not to worry, that Eliza was fine and with them in Colombia. The caller made it clear that Eliza had been kidnapped, but was in no rush to make demands. Eliza's father caught the next flight back to Ecuador. At first, the Levy family hoped to resolve the situation without involving the police. The question they faced wouldn't have crossed the mind of someone from any other country. Was it even worth calling the authorities? In Ecuador, not everyone trusts the police. Even in the case of a serious crime like kidnapping, some Ecuadorians try to solve the problem on their own. But there was another option. Ecuador's police force has an elite unit specifically for dealing with kidnappings known as UNAS. This unit, made up of 100 specially trained agents, is tasked with tracking down kidnappers and helping families through the harrowing ordeal of a loved one being abducted. They assist with negotiations, ransom discussions, and, when possible, organize rescue operations. The Levy family contacted UNAS. It's worth noting that while kidnapping an American in Ecuador is not unheard of, it is usually a less dangerous scenario, where a tourist is held in a taxi for a few hours and forced to withdraw cash from an ATM. This time, however, the situation was far more serious. The most terrifying possibility was if the kidnappers had ties to FARC, the Colombian guerrilla group. In that case, Eliza could be taken deep into the jungle and held for years. Given this, the UNAS specialists advised the family to also contact the U.S. Embassy in Quito. On the morning of Wednesday, October 21st, 4 days after the kidnapping, FBI agents, UNAS officers, and other agents arrived at the Levy home. They promised to try to track down the kidnappers, but they emphasized that the most critical and delicate task in securing Eliza's release would be communication with the criminals. The leader of the kidnappers had left Eliza's mother with a phone number, but who would have the courage to call him? The agents decided that Eliza's father, James Levy, who was known by the Spanish version of his name, Jamie, was capable of handling the delicate task of communicating with the kidnappers. With the agent's guidance, of course. They handed him a sheet with potential phrases the kidnappers might use and how he should respond. After a brief briefing, James made the call to the leader of the kidnapping gang. He had to ask his wife to leave the room to avoid breaking down in front of her. The conversation lasted 4.5 minutes, and the kidnappers didn't allow James to speak with his daughter, claiming she wasn't with them. However, the most important information they gave him was that Eliza had been kidnapped for ransom, and they would later reveal the amount. James held himself together remarkably well during the call, but that evening, after the agents left, he locked himself in his office with a bottle of whiskey and broke down in tears. He was overwhelmed with guilt, blaming himself for what had happened. For years, he had worked with various organizations and groups on both sides of the Ecuador-Colombia border, and he had arrogantly believed that his family was safe from harm. At the same time, Eliza was being held in a remote area of Ecuador, less than 200 miles from her family. She had no way of knowing that they were fighting for her release. All she knew was that the past few days had been the most painful, disorienting, and terrifying of her life. After the strangers jumped into the SUV, they pressed a gun to her neck and promised that nothing would happen to her as long as she behaved sensibly. They threw a towel over her head, cuffed her hands, and gagged her. Then they dragged her from the front passenger seat to the back, laying her on the floor. One of the men moved to the front while another stayed in the back to guard her. Eliza didn't even think about resisting. Everything had happened so fast that she hadn't fully realized she had been kidnapped. It felt like a dream, but it was a nightmare she couldn't wake from. They drove off-road for over an hour, bouncing along rough terrain. Then, the vehicle came to a sudden stop. The door opened. She heard someone approach. A man told her to get out and walk with them. Eliza recognized his voice. It was the man who had arranged the meeting about tropical birds. They led her somewhere to what she sensed was an even more dangerous and isolated place. From the moment she fell into the hands of her captors, Eliza resolved to remain calm and alert. She knew that one wrong move could cost her life. When the captors finally removed the blanket from her head, Eliza saw that they were heavily armed, their faces concealed by ski masks. They told her they were part of a paramilitary group, and that the threat extended not only to her, but also to her family in Quito. They claimed they had stationed people around her family's home and warned that if she made any foolish moves, her family would suffer. The men asked if she had a GPS chip implanted under her skin, a measure that wealthy individuals in Latin America sometimes take to track their location in case of kidnapping. That's when Eliza realized that the gang believed she came from a wealthy family. She assured them this wasn't the case, but the men were convinced that her American father would pay a large ransom for her. After that, they forced her to record a message on a phone for her parents. She spoke under their direction. "Mom, Dad, I'm okay. Just do what they say and don't talk to the police." She tried to speak calmly, knowing that her mother would be terrified beyond words. The men then took her phone, watch, and tablet from her backpack, but left her with a change of clothes, a book, and something else she wouldn't remember until much later. They chained her to a tree, next to which they had hastily set up an improvised tent. Under the guidance of the agents, Eliza's father, James, negotiated with the kidnappers regarding the ransom. He knew that kidnappings were common in Ecuador, but he had always believed his family wouldn't be affected, as they didn't have the money to make them targets. However, in a country where being an American often equates to being seen as wealthy, his worst fears were confirmed when the leader of the gang valued Eliza's life at $1 million. Following the agent's instructions, James told the kidnappers that he wouldn't even consider paying a ransom until he was certain his daughter was alive. Although the criminals had forced Eliza to record a message for her parents, they never sent it. So James asked questions only Eliza could answer, such as the names of her grandmother and godfather. When they received the correct responses, the family was finally assured that Eliza was alive. The urgent issue then became how to raise the money. Despite the U.S. Embassy providing every possible support to the family, they were unable to offer the ransom. If the embassy were to pay $1 million for every kidnapped American, it would set a dangerous precedent. Essentially, the family only had their house, and the bank agreed to loan them $80,000 with the home as collateral. In desperation, James called his relatives in New York, and his brother and sister decided to give him all the money they had saved for retirement. James and his wife planned to sell the house afterward to repay their siblings. James informed the kidnapper that the maximum they could gather was $150,000, but the captors insisted the ransom should be closer to $1 million. With each conversation becoming shorter and more tense, the agents knew time was running out. They hurriedly began surveillance on known criminals in the region who could be suspects. Meanwhile, the family had no idea what Eliza had already endured or what lay ahead for her. By this point, she had spent 2 weeks chained to a tree, only able to move as far as the chain would allow. Exhausted and with limited mobility, she fought to stay strong, but it was becoming harder to battle her fears. Nighttime was her only solace, when she imagined she could hear her mother's voice. She found comfort in this imagined whisper, and, though she had never been particularly religious, she began to pray. Of course, Eliza had no idea that U.S. and Ecuadorian agents were hunting her kidnappers, let alone that Colombian specialists had joined the investigation. Colombians have extensive experience dealing with kidnappings, and their assistance proved invaluable. They provided high-tech equipment to track the leader of the gang's mobile phone. Naturally, there was no guarantee that he was in the same location as Eliza, but investigators had other leads to follow. The most useful lead came from Eliza herself when she asked her brother to record the SUV's license plate number. Investigators matched this number with those of vehicles captured by surveillance cameras at toll booths. They identified the vehicle used by the kidnappers, which had passed through several toll booths and was heading towards the Colombian border. During her captivity, Eliza interacted only with the two guards who watched over her. The leader of the gang would come and go, staying in a cabin about 50 yards from her tent, and she rarely saw him directly. The two guards played the classic roles of good cop and bad cop. The guard Eliza privately referred to as the good guy would bring her rice and beans and assured her that she would be released soon. In contrast, the other guard, the bad guy, threatened to kill her and her family. He also menaced that he might sell her to a larger, more dangerous group. Eliza understood that he meant FARC, an even more brutal gang experienced in holding hostages. While she was terrified, she cried alone, unwilling to show weakness to her captors, especially the one who was threatening her. It took a lot of willpower, but Eliza gradually managed to overcome her fear. She daydreamed about riding her bike, feeling free. Deciding to take action, she tried to gain the favor of the good guy guard. Indeed, he began talking to her more frequently during meals and even brought her yarn and knitting needles. She knitted 4 scarves for him, hoping to learn more about her family in exchange. He told her that her parents were alive and negotiating for her release. However, her hope was quickly dashed when the other guard openly threatened to cut off one of her fingers to increase the pressure on her parents. After 18 days of captivity, Eliza could no longer simply sit and wait for rescue. There were times when the two guards would wander far enough from her tent that she was only held back by a chain with a small lock. The knitting needles they had given her were too big to be of any use, but she wondered if she could find something to break the lock. Her desperation sparked creativity. The kidnappers had taken all her gadgets but left her backpack. At the bottom of the bag, she found some bobby pins. Eliza took 2 pins, bent them, and began to pick at the lock, as she had seen in movies. For the next 3 days, whenever the guards were out of sight, she worked on the lock. She tried over and over again until one day it finally clicked open. With incredible willpower, she managed to stay calm. One of the guards seemed ruthless enough to shoot her if she tried to escape, so she climbed nearby trees to get a sense of her surroundings, trying to see if there was any visible path or if the jungle was too impenetrable. Then she would return, sit down, and relock the chain. Eliza was terrified of being caught. With each attempt, she grew bolder. She had resolved to take the risk and escape from her captors. She closed her eyes, praying for guidance from her mother. At that moment, she thought she heard her mother's voice saying, "Don't risk it, don't run, wait 2 days." Eliza decided to heed the advice and wait, though not for long, as she noticed the guards' growing tension. Her time was running out. Eliza had been independent and comfortable in nature since childhood, and now she used those qualities to keep her mind occupied. She spent hours watching the trees, trying to identify the birds by their colors and songs. During the day, she reread the only book she had with her, a Colombian romance novel. But then the night would come again. The chains around her ankles prevented her from sleeping more than an hour or 2 at a time, and every rustle in the jungle could signal new danger. On the night of Saturday, November 7th, she suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and distinctly heard some sounds and saw the lights of flashlights. In the dim light, Eliza could only make out silhouettes. There were many of them, and they carried military-grade weapons. The silhouettes moved hurriedly. Eliza feared that these were FARC members. She imagined she might spend years with this group in the Colombian jungle. As the lights and shadows approached her tent, one of the men leaned in. He said something, but she couldn't hear him over her cries and pleas not to take her away. He then said that they were police officers, that they knew her father Jamie, and that they had come to rescue her. When Eliza heard her father's name, a wave of joy washed over her. She could only hope this was not a dream. The officers covered her with a bulletproof blanket and stayed with her while they conducted the operation to capture the armed kidnappers. When UNAC officers called the Levy family to inform them of Eliza's rescue, her mother, Alicia, answered the phone. Suddenly, she began to scream and jump for joy. The family describes this as the best moment of their lives, as if they could breathe freely again. They had to wait a few more hours to learn that Eliza was unharmed and safe. NAS officers brought Eliza back to Quito. Although she was eager to reunite with her family, the UNASE officials had other plans. They wanted to highlight the successful operation to rescue the hostage and encourage other families to seek police assistance without fear. To publicly showcase the moment of reunion, they held a brief press conference before introducing Eliza to her parents. After 3 weeks of anxious prayers and waiting, her family finally embraced her. As for the kidnappers, they turned out to be ordinary criminals rather than a militarized group. Eliza's testimony helped to charge the leader of the gang and the guard who had been kind to her, while the second guard managed to escape. Despite spending 3 weeks in a tiny tent, Eliza tried to maintain a positive outlook on her experience, particularly appreciating the beautiful forest that surrounded her. While no one would wish to spend 21 days in the jungle, she found it far better than being confined in a small, dark room. Her positive attitude helped her recover quickly, and she eventually became a source of strength for her family. Remarkably, just 8 weeks after returning home, Eliza embarked on a cycling trip across South America. She traveled 4,000 miles, and the local press covered her journey. She claims that the sense of freedom she experienced while cycling made the trip a healing experience for her. Late at night, cousins Anna Franklin and Jennifer Holliday were returning home, unaware of the nightmare awaiting them ahead. Jennifer became a hostage of a mentally unstable kidnapper, but found a way to contact the rescue service operator, who would stop at nothing to save her. At the intersection of highways 59 and 69, just a few hours' drive from the largest cities in the state of Texas, lies the quiet town of Lufkin. For 27-year-old Jennifer Holliday, Lufkin had been home her entire life. Jennifer was raising her 5-year-old son on her own and had been working as part of an ambulance crew for about 3 years. Sometimes her shifts would stretch to 70 hours, and it was challenging for her to balance such a demanding job with raising a child. So she was thrilled when her cousin, 18-year-old Anna Franklin, moved in with her. Jennifer loved living with Anna. She was like a younger sister to her, and her son quickly bonded with the girl. Around 1 a.m. on May 29, 2005, Jennifer returned home after working 2 grueling shifts and found no one in the apartment. She called Anna and asked where she was at such a late hour. It turned out that Anna had been babysitting the child of Jennifer's friends that evening and asked her sister to pick her up since she wasn't sleeping anyway. Jennifer was very tired but didn't refuse her sister. When she arrived in her Ford Explorer, Anna was already waiting for her. The girls drove in the car, listening to a new CD, when they decided that despite the late hour, they wanted something tasty. Anna persuaded Jennifer to stop at a 24-hour store and buy Skittles. But after the girls left the store at the gas station, they were not alone. Now, an unfamiliar SUV was following them. After driving a few kilometers, the girls heard a very loud noise from the left side. They panicked. Jennifer thought another car had hit them because she couldn't imagine what had actually happened. Anna seemed to realize faster what had occurred. She screamed that someone had shot at them and dialed 911. Stephanie Davidson, a rescue service operator, answered her call. Stephanie tried to calm the screaming girl, but only managed to do so almost completely, and something triggered a new wave of panic. The girls spoke on the phone with the operator, seeking help after the terrible attack. But the hitch was that it wasn't over yet. The poor things kept screaming that he was coming back. They managed to report that the man who attacked them had opened the door of their car when the connection was cut off. The operator called Anna back, trying to find out where they were. At the same time, she dialed another number, informing the county dispatcher that they needed to send a patrol in that direction. Unfortunately, as the patrols headed in the specified direction, the attack on Anna and Jennifer only intensified. Still holding a shotgun, the criminal stopped his car and approached the girl's Ford. He opened the driver's side door and fired. The shot hit Anna in the head and struck Jennifer's chest, arm, and neck. The man dragged Jennifer, bleeding, into his SUV, then returned to her Ford. As she watched his clumsy attempts to remove her sister's body from the crime scene, Jennifer noticed a weapon discarded by the man on the front seat. It occurred to her that she could get rid of the shotgun used by the assailant. With her healthy hand, she grabbed the weapon and threw it out of the window. However, she quickly noticed several more guns scattered around the man's car. Immediately after that, the criminal abandoned his attempts to move Anna's body and got behind the wheel of his SUV, driving Jennifer away from the crime scene. At this time, rescue service operator Stephanie Davidson desperately tried to trace the last incoming call. Using the phone's ping, she managed to pinpoint only the approximate location of the car. So she continued dialing the number until the phone reappeared on the line. Stephanie learned that the phone was located at the intersection of highways 69 and 7. She immediately dispatched officers there. At 4 a.m., police officers approached the abandoned car on Highway 69. On the road, they found weapons, and inside the car, there was a person in the passenger seat. The girl had been seriously wounded in the head, but was still breathing. Inside the car, the officers also found the driver's documents, Jennifer Holliday, assuming she was the second victim of the crime. Officers tried to find the driver, but she was nowhere to be found. They speculated that Jennifer might be hiding in the woods or had run for help. Therefore, at this stage, they were most concerned about Anna's condition. They obviously couldn't imagine that Jennifer hadn't run for help but was sitting in the killer's car, bleeding. As the kidnapper veered off the highway, Jennifer began considering her options for escape. Believing she had no chance of survival, she contemplated whether it was worth the risk to seize the assailant's weapon and use it. While Jennifer pondered, the man's behavior became increasingly strange and aggressive. He suddenly struck her in a fit of rage, then inexplicably burst into laughter. She couldn't tell if the man was insane. He clearly acted as if he mistook Jennifer and Anna for someone else. Eventually, he stopped in a deserted part of the road, dragged Jennifer out of the car, tore her clothes, and assaulted her. When it was all over and they got back into the car, he suddenly transformed into a completely different person. "Oh no," he lamented. "What happened to you? You're covered in blood. What happened to your hand?" It was as if the man had forgotten his own crime. Just moments ago, he had been tormenting his victim, and now he was sympathetic and friendly. Jennifer became increasingly convinced that the man was mentally unstable, but she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, she could use his insanity to her advantage. Despite the severe bleeding from gunshot wounds in her chest, neck, and arm, Jennifer formulated a plan. "I've been shot," she began, rejoicing in her cunning and unexpected luck. She concocted a story about a completely different person who had wounded her. "You just found me on the road and were going to take me to your home, remember?" The man looked at her as if she were the crazy one, but she continued to convince him that he had appeared after a guy named John had left her wounded on the road. Thanks to her persistence, the kidnapper began to believe that he had indeed saved her and had nothing to do with Jennifer and Anna's injuries. He gave the girl his clothes to cover herself and fashioned an improvised tourniquet for her arm. This slowed the bleeding somewhat, but time was not on her side. Continuing to thank the man for behaving like a hero, Jennifer skillfully pressured him to let her use his phone. At first, he dismissed her idea of calling 911 from his home because there was a warrant out for his arrest. But Jennifer didn't back down, inventing more details about the fictitious man named John who had shot her. She insisted that she urgently needed medical help, otherwise she would die from massive blood loss. Finally, he relented and agreed to take her to his home so she could call for an ambulance. Jennifer Holliday managed to persuade her confused kidnapper to take her to a phone. The problem was that the phone was in his house. Jennifer was overwhelmed with horror when she saw that he lived near a cemetery, with absolutely no other buildings nearby. To reach his house, they had to drive through the cemetery on an old, truly ancient road. But Jennifer managed to keep herself composed and not reveal her true feelings. Together with her kidnapper, she entered the empty house. The man forced Jennifer to tell the operator that only one ambulance should come, no police, and then allowed her to make the call. Unbeknownst to Jennifer, the voice she heard on the other end of the line was familiar to her, Stephanie Davidson. Jennifer told her that she was injured and was at a friend's house, who found her on the side of the road after someone shot her. The operator began to relay information to someone else, mentioning another shooting, but when Jennifer heard this, she repeated, "The same one, the same one, the same one" several times, trying to convey that it was the same incident. As soon as she said this, there was a brief pause. Fortunately, this brief moment was enough for Stephanie to understand that Jennifer was the driver of the Ford they found on the highway. She asked for the address of Jennifer's location, but due to the amount of blood the girl had lost, she became scattered and was barely conscious. She couldn't explain to Stephanie how to get to the house, so she convinced the kidnapper to approach the phone, speak to the 911 operator, and tell her where his house was. The operator realized that she would now be personally communicating with the suspect, so she calmly asked for the address to send the ambulance. He indeed explained how to get to his house. Now, Stephanie's main task was to find out if the injured girl was still in danger, and if so, what kind of help she needed. So she convinced the man that while they waited for the medics, the only thing he could do was bring Jennifer some water. Once the man went to get a glass of water, the operator asked Jennifer questions, to which she answered yes or no, to determine if she was with the kidnapper and how dangerous he might be in order to inform the police. When the man returned and took the phone again, Stephanie picked up on the line of behavior initiated by Jennifer to prevent the mentally unstable man from switching back and remembering that he was not a hero, but rather Jennifer's kidnapper and Anna's murderer. The operator reassured the man that the ambulance would arrive soon and asked how Jennifer was feeling. He replied, "She's keeping calm, but I know she's terribly scared, just like me because I found her, and I'm also very scared because I'm covered in blood." The operator assured the man that he was doing great and reiterated that the ambulance was already on its way. While the ambulance rushed to the house where Jennifer Holliday was being held hostage, the police were busy gathering information about the kidnapper. It turned out that the house belonged to a 31-year-old named Eric Parnell. He had a history of trouble with the law chases, threats, domestic violence, and similar offenses. Initially, officers thought that arresting Parnell would be straightforward, especially considering that Eric had once engaged in a 3-hour armed standoff with the police. Unfortunately, Parnell's house was so far away that the ambulance took about 40 minutes to arrive. Throughout this time, Stephanie Davidson remained on the line with the kidnapper. She continuously encouraged and thanked Parnell, assuring him that he was doing a great job helping the girl. However, when the ambulance arrived, his mood changed drastically. He noticed that a car with 2 paramedics had pulled up near the cemetery, but they didn't rush to turn off the engine or dim their headlights. They didn't approach the house as they should have. It was a very tense moment for Stephanie because she had to convince Parnell that the medics couldn't find their way to his house. She was sure that Jennifer's life was now in even greater danger because the kidnapper might snap and harm both of them. Parnell was starting to suspect that the medics were waiting for the police and thus weren't moving. Finally, Stephanie managed to convince Parnell that the ambulance wouldn't be able to reach the porch of his house, so he would have to help the girl walk out to the doctors. As Jennifer exited the house, Parnell followed closely behind her. She recalls trying to walk steadily to avoid falling, when suddenly she noticed some movement among the trees. She almost convinced herself that it was just a hallucination due to blood loss. But it wasn't a hallucination because in addition to the ambulance, Stephanie had sent members of the SWAT team to her rescue, and they were getting closer to Parnell with each passing moment. Eric Parnell was arrested and charged with murder, assault, battery, and kidnapping. Jennifer, now free from the grip of her assailant and kidnapper, was overwhelmed with emotions. First and foremost, she wanted to rid herself of his belongings. She couldn't believe she had actually survived. Jennifer was immediately taken to the intensive care unit at the hospital. But all she could think about, or rather, all she could think about, was her sister. She hoped that her sister was also in the hospital, that her life had been saved. She hoped that the gunshot had only grazed her, and that Anna would pull through. However, after speaking with the police, she faced the cruel reality. Anna was dead. Meanwhile, while in custody, Parnell continued to claim that he had done nothing wrong and had actually saved Jennifer. However, investigators had no doubts about how events unfolded that day. Parnell tried to call his ex-wife, who had obtained a restraining order against him. He demanded that her parents put her on the phone, and if they didn't, he threatened to harm the entire family. Then he went home and loaded all the weapons he had, but he changed his mind about going to his ex-wife's house. Instead, he went to a local bar. As later told by the girls who were at the bar, the man drank a lot and tried to hit on them, but his behavior irritated the girls. None of them can describe why they didn't like the man, but he gave them all the creeps. Receiving yet another rejection, Eric still wasn't ready to go to bed. He went to the 24-hour gas station near his house, where Anna happened to be buying Skittles. His ex-wife drives the same type of car as Jennifer, which likely prompted Parnell's attack on the girls. His inflamed imagination told him that his ex-wife was behind the wheel, and he wanted to hurt her. The girls just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. After several days of trial, Eric Parnell unexpectedly pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. He showed no remorse, claiming to remember nothing and blaming the girls for everything. Jennifer Holliday survived a horrific attack, but her troubles didn't end there when she had to face the consequences of the arm injury. She lost her job in emergency services and medical insurance. Jennifer fell into debt and couldn't afford much-needed surgeries anymore. But luck smiled upon her in September 2007. Learning about her misfortunes, the CEO and president of the state's largest non-profit healthcare system, Memorial Hermann Hospital, Dan Wolterman, paid for the surgery Jennifer couldn't afford. The operation restored mobility to her elbow joint. While she couldn't return to her previous job, she could now hope to find new employment. "I know I'll never be able to go back to my old job, but I can find a purpose for myself. I'm sure of it," Jennifer said. School friends. It's impossible without them, but it's not always easy with them due to bullying, peer pressure, or pretense. Sometimes the latter hurts more. Just think about it. You are still learning to trust those around you. Who knows, maybe family relationships aren't perfect either. That's why you start relying on your friends even more. But what if the person you considered your best friend stabs you in the back? In the story of 14-year-old Desiree Turner, full of unbelievable twists and surprising turns, it happened almost literally. In 2017, Desiree Turner was a 14-year-old ninth grader from Utah. Her family owned a small farm in Smithfield. Her parents, April and Matt Turner, considered the town to be a very safe place, ideal for raising children. Desiree was passionate about equestrian sports, kickboxing, played the saxophone, and was generally a very sociable girl. She was known for her determination, persistence, and the habit of achieving her set goals. She never gave up on a task, no matter how difficult or seemingly impossible it appeared. Thursday, February 16, 2017, turned out to be an extremely cold and frosty day. That morning, Desiree was running late for the school bus, so her father gave her a ride to school. During the middle of the day, she sent a message to her mother, asking if she could hang out with friends for a while. Her mother easily granted her permission, but asked her to be home by 4:30 p.m. Since there were 5 children in the family ranging in age from 8 to 20 years old, mobile phones were essential. Desiree used hers as often as any other 14-year-old girl. She frequently took pictures of her food, her beloved horses, the car, basically anything and everything. Every day, the children messaged their mother to let her know when they got on the bus, about their school progress, and when they were heading back home. Desiree was a responsible girl, so her mother didn't inquire about who she was going out with or ask her to call every 5 minutes. However, when the agreed-upon time came and Desiree still wasn't home, and she wasn't responding to calls and messages, her mother became concerned. Her older sister also didn't know her whereabouts. At first, April didn't worry too much, thinking her daughter's phone might have run out of battery or that she had lost it. However, around 5 o'clock, she called her husband at work to share her concern. Since it was a small town, April didn't hesitate to get in the car and drive to the few places where teenagers might hang out, like McDonald's. Along with a friend, she started calling acquaintances, asking if they had heard anything about her daughter. The woman was beginning to suspect that perhaps her daughter had done something foolish and was afraid to come home and confess to her parents. As darkness settled over the town, April couldn't sit still. Her imagination painted grim scenarios. She reached out to friends on social media, and they hit the streets in search of the teenager. Desiree's friends also attempted to contact her, but there was no word from the usually very responsible girl. April called the police. The officers quickly learned that someone had spotted Desiree on a trail near the school. It was a small path that ran between the main road and the school. An officer went there but found nothing. They also interviewed her acquaintances, trying to determine who she might have gone with that day. They found out she was friends with a boy from school named Coulter Peterson, and it seemed he might have had a crush on Desiree. The police contacted him and his parents, but he claimed he hadn't been in touch with Desiree for a long time. He explained that he had been playing video games with his friend Jason Decker, and Jason corroborated Coulter's statement. The police had no other leads. Meanwhile, other officers searched Desiree's room and found a letter from her ex-boyfriend that raised suspicions. In the letter, the boy apologized for something that had upset Desiree. It was evident that he still had feelings for her, whereas she did not. This naturally led the police to speak with him. However, during their in-person meeting, the boy didn't raise any suspicions, and his apologies seemed genuinely heartfelt. It appeared that this lead had also reached a dead end for the police. The police hoped that phone records would provide more information about Desiree's whereabouts. The last ping was recorded at 4:31 p.m. Officers went to the location from which this ping was sent. April and Mike were already imagining that their daughter was being held somewhere in captivity, perhaps in a basement. However, this turned out to be another dead end because she wasn't there. It was an entirely ordinary house belonging to a regular family situated by the canal. Since the police had asked the girl's parents to stay home and occupy themselves, her mother continued to communicate with friends on social media. Desiree's former teacher, Sue Hintz, had already planned to go to bed when she noticed a huge number of messages about the missing schoolgirl. Christy Barfus, a family friend of the Turners, also learned about the search only around 10 p.m. when she returned home from work. She had already heard that Desiree hadn't returned home on time after school, attributing it to teenage forgetfulness. However, now that the entire town was involved in searching for the missing teenager, the two friends felt the need to do something, knowing that they wouldn't be able to sleep anyway. Sue noticed that the last recorded location of Desiree was near the canal. She knew it was a popular spot for walks among the town's teenagers, so together with Christy, they decided to search for Desiree there. It was very dark, cold, and muddy. The women illuminated their path with flashlights, not really expecting to find the girl. They assumed that Desiree, like thousands of teenagers before her, would come forward on her own and face the consequences. But suddenly they noticed some movement. Approaching closer, they saw a small hand. When the flashlight's beam revealed a horse's bridle in the darkness, they realized it was indeed Desiree. It was Desiree. She was lying on her back. One of her boots was nearby. Half of her face was severely swollen, but she was alive and conscious. The women didn't know how long she had been there, but her skin felt icy to the touch. They shed their coats and wrapped Desiree up. While Sue called the emergency services, Christy called April. Christy explained to the girl's mother that she was injured and asked April to comfort her daughter. April began talking to Desiree, telling her that they were on their way to her. While Desiree could only say that her head hurt when speaking to Christy, when she heard her mother's voice, her swollen face suddenly brightened, and she tried to reassure her mother that she was okay. Mark and April arrived at the canal at the same time as the ambulance. Desiree kept repeating that she was cold and had a headache. Her parents believed that she had been beaten and left in the canal, but the most important thing was that she was alive. At the hospital, doctors hurried to treat Desiree for hypothermia. However, they soon discovered that she had other, much deeper and more gruesome wounds. Blood on Desiree's head prompted the doctors to conduct a scan. To their horror, they found a bullet lodged in her brain. They called her parents and informed them that someone had shot Desiree in the back of the head. April and Mike found it incredibly difficult to believe and accept that someone had shot their daughter in the head. The doctor tried to prepare them for the worst, explaining that people with such injuries typically do not survive, and if they do, they often remain in a vegetative state. While Desiree was transported by helicopter to a children's hospital in Salt Lake City and placed in a coma, the police were informed of the medic's discovery. An investigation into attempted murder began. The police cordoned off the canal area. In addition to Desiree's footprints, they also found other clear shoe prints. However, there were no other leads. Investigators didn't even know where the crime had occurred, near the canal, or if Desiree had been brought there. Moreover, there was no sign of the gun's shell casing. On the other hand, the police learned that the perpetrator had stolen Desiree's multicolored backpack and her mobile phone. The police had no suspects either. They had ruled out all possible suspects during the evening while the search was ongoing. Therefore, by examining her Facebook interactions and friends, investigators invited 47 of her friends to the police station the following morning. During the investigators' conversation with Desiree's friends, two names stood out: Coulter and Jason, both 16-year-olds who had been interviewed by the police earlier. There was no evidence connecting the boys to Desiree until the detectives obtained her phone records. On the day of Desiree's disappearance, she had been in contact with Coulter. This meant that Coulter had lied. Additionally, a witness, a townsperson, reported seeing two teenage boys, one of whom was carrying a multicolored backpack matching Desiree's description. Detectives obtained footage from a home security camera showing two boys with the backpack at around 5 p.m. that day. Coulter told the police that after school, he and Jason played video games at his house, then went to Jason's and played more video games. At some point, they went to a store to buy drinks and snacks before returning to Jason's. The school surveillance camera showed the boys leaving school together and then heading in the opposite direction around 5:30 p.m. However, there was a gap in the timeline during the same period when Desiree's phone stopped working. Jason vehemently denied any involvement in the attack, but remembered that Coulter had briefly left the house and returned, and Jason didn't know where Coulter had gone. Detectives continued to question Coulter, informing him that Desiree was found dead. His reaction was indicative of someone who knew something but was trying to conceal it. Approximately 20 hours after Desiree was found in the canal, Coulter admitted to shooting her. He was arrested on attempted murder charges and claimed that he acted alone, leading to Jason's release. While Coulter initially claimed sole responsibility for the crime, new evidence suggested otherwise. Investigators examined the boys' phones and discovered that they had disabled GPS trackers and enabled airplane mode, but had forgotten about Wi-Fi. The police used this information to triangulate their location at the time of the crime, linking them to the canal. When Jason was interrogated for the second time, he provided 3 different versions of what happened. On the third attempt, he admitted to being at the canal when Coulter pulled the trigger, stating that he was afraid for his life and believed Coulter would kill him if he said anything. Here's what actually happened. Desiree needed a knife for a feed bag, and she mentioned this to Coulter. He offered to sell her his pocket knife, but this was actually a pretext to lure her to the meeting place. Most likely, Desiree also saw it as an opportunity to see a boy she liked. Initially, the boys discussed another murder weapon, planning to slit her throat because it would be much quieter. However, as a precaution, Coulter brought a .22 caliber revolver with him. Messages on their phones indirectly confirmed that the boys had planned everything. They began by texting, "Let's finish this." Later, near the canal, Jason messaged Coulter, urging him on. Coulter asked if everything was clear, to which Jason replied yes. This was the signal for Coulter to pull the trigger. Afterward, Coulter smashed Desiree's phone and tablet and threw them into the canal. They took $55 from the girl and went to a store to buy food and drinks. Coulter showed investigators where he had hidden the gun. He had kept the casing as a memento, placing it prominently on the windowsill above his bed, displaying a sense of pride about what they had done. 8 days after the attack, Desiree regained consciousness. Surviving a gunshot to the head is exceedingly rare, with only 5% of victims surviving such an ordeal. Of those survivors, only 3% managed to lead relatively normal lives. The .22 caliber bullet fired from the revolver lacked sufficient force to penetrate the skull fully. Often, after the initial impact, it ricochets inside the cranial vault, causing even more damage. Sometimes, a larger caliber bullet that passes through causes less damage. Fortunately, in Desiree's case, the bullet did not ricochet and became lodged in the vicinity of her forehead. It remains there to this day, as removing it would be too dangerous. Desiree had to relearn how to hold her head, eat, drink, speak, and move. However, thanks to her determination, she managed to regain her independence. 2 months later, she was able to check out of the hospital. Her body continued to recover, and she endured significant pain. Yet she had to bear even greater pain when she learned the motive behind the attack on her. When Desiree woke up, her father told her that she had been shot, but that she was okay. Initially, she believed the shooting had occurred at school and was reluctant to believe that Coulter had attacked her. She considered him a true friend. Desiree and Coulter had met a year or two before the events described, and she was immediately drawn to the attractive young man, wanting to be friends and spend time together. Like any typical teenager, she sent many messages on Snapchat. Apparently, this annoyed Coulter, and he considered Desiree to be clingy. During a video game session with Jason, he had expressed frustration, saying he wanted to get rid of Desiree. Jason calmly replied, "Well, you have a 6-inch knife? Why don't you do it yourself?" Incredibly, Coulter took this suggestion seriously, and Jason didn't clarify that he was joking. The two boys then devised a plan to kill Desiree. When Coulter suggested meeting her at the canal under the pretense of buying a knife, she didn't refuse. She likely thought that Coulter didn't want to be alone with her and didn't attach much significance to Jason's sudden appearance. They discussed the knife, chatted a bit, and when it was time to head home, she had already said her goodbyes and started walking home. However, the boys called out to her and asked her to stay for a couple of minutes, claiming they were looking for a dropped ring. Desiree bent down to examine the metallic glimmer of the ring when she felt an excruciating pain in her head. At first, she had no recollection of the 8 hours spent at the canal, but later, the memories and nightmares of her attempts to crawl and call for help began to torment her. She remembered feeling terribly alone. To this day, she finds it incredibly hurtful and painful to recall news headlines about the clingy girl who got shot in the head. She grappled with feelings for Coulter that were evidently not reciprocated, realizing this was not easy for her. Initially, she even isolated herself from others, thinking that nobody would want to associate with a burden. But later, shared acquaintances and school friends began mentioning that Coulter occasionally displayed aggressive behavior. He had threatened other girls with a knife and even talked about conducting a school shooting. This revelation shifted the police's initial belief that Coulter had fallen under Jason's manipulation to the understanding that both teenagers harbored aggression. Both teenagers admitted their guilt in court and were sentenced to imprisonment ranging from 15 years to life. During the trial, Desiree told Coulter that she hoped he would think of her every time he used his left hand, as she could no longer use hers. She mentioned that waking up every morning and looking at the camera, he should remember how hard it was for her. When he had a headache, he should multiply that pain by 1,000 and remember that it was because of him that a bullet was still lodged in her brain. She expressed her hatred for him and what he had done to her, emphasizing that she had trusted him. She told him that his life would be confined to a small room, but her life was also limited. In response, Coulter cried while listening to her words. He stated, "I want to pay for what I did, and I will spend the rest of my life atoning for my mistakes, hoping to be forgiven someday." However, Desiree believes that the boys do not truly repent. They may be upset about having to spend time in prison, but not because of what they did to her. Particularly, in Jason's eyes, she didn't see a shadow of remorse. Despite a 2-year break in her education, Desiree successfully completed high school and became the school prom queen. Although she can never fulfill her dream of becoming a nurse, she has found new goals in life. She plans to attend college and currently works at the church, engages in volunteer activities, and with her family has created a vast flower garden. For Desiree, flowers symbolize the beauty of her new life, new beginnings, and the strength of survival. That's why she donates bouquets to hospitals, daycare centers, and other institutions where they can help people feel better in their surroundings. Desiree's story is an inspiration to anyone who has experienced emotional or physical trauma. She teaches us not to let anyone break us, to never give up, and to be grateful for what we have.